for joining today on our webinar, Natural Security Benefits for InfoSec Leadership. My name is Stephen Marshowitz, Director of Program Development here at TrustedSec. And when a security program grows organically, it's typically rooted in incidents and fires. And when they do mature, the company grows, yet they still struggle to support the needs of the business. So today we'll be talking about how to overcome some of those inherent roadblocks and lead by patterning your program after prolific natural systems. First, a few housekeeping items. This webinar is recorded, so you can go back and review it on our YouTube page, and definitely ask questions in the Q&A area along the way. We'll make sure we get to them either during it or at the end. So a little bit about TrustedSec. At TrustedSec, we start with the most challenging aspect of security, understanding the real world effectiveness of your existing security controls against skilled attackers using cutting edge techniques. The company was founded on this principle. And it is critical because the better the research and innovation, the better value you receive from our engagements. In looking across the full life cycle of your program, TrustedSec can help with building, with risk, program, and compliance reviews and readiness. Testing, this is not only penetration testing, but customized testing as well. Fixing the remediation of those issues with security solutions. And finally, we also help with responding to any incidents your program may have. Okay, on to our speakers today. Rockie Brockway is the director of TrustedSec's innovations team, and Alex Hamerstone, who is TrustedSec's advisory solutions director and star of stage and screen. Rockie, take it away.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for taking a little bit of time here. This is a talk that is really kind of one of my side passions. And we're going to be talking natural security benefits for InfoSec leadership. Basically, this was rooted in a talk I gave almost a decade ago. In 2012, a research paper and book came out. The book was called Learning from the Octopus. And a lot of these natural security concepts I really latched onto and was really passionate about helping organizations apply these concepts to information security programs. And over the years, I've seen successes here and there, but it's actually been pretty sparse just in terms of that. And I thought that now, 10 years after the release of that book, that really kind of got me thinking about this. It would be a good opportunity for us here at TrustedSec to maybe revisit it, especially for people who may not be very familiar with this. As Mr. Marshowitz pointed out, with me is my very good friend and cohort, Alex Hamerstone. Alex, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everyone. We're very much looking forward to this presentation. As Rockie mentioned, this is something that's absolutely one of his passions, and it's an absolute privilege to be able to work with the whole team here, but especially Rockie, in that how much time he spends thinking about these strategies and really ways to help information security programs become better.
Thanks, buddy. So what is this really about? We're going to start just by kind of looking at general information security programs, how they typically grow, looking at a program life cycle, from several angles, from a leadership support perspective, from maturity, and as well as from a centralization/decentralization perspective. We're gonna touch upon some very common organizational challenges related to programs and program maturity. And then we're going to dive into some of the principles that naturally adaptive systems utilize and look at it from the perspective of, okay, well, as opposed to kind of the top-down centralization, what are some of the advantages of decentralization, not only in nature but also how we can apply it to information security in our own programs. One of the key concepts here is this challenge, competition, cooperation. idea. And so we'll be diving into that. And then we'll be looking at some more specific things around these types of systems. Are there ways that we can speed up these techniques? Are there opportunities for hybrid solutions that may be both centralized and decentralized? And then how can we manage kind of the decentralization as a whole? So let's move on. In my role within TrustedSec, I work with organizations very closely in these three primary areas, right? So program maturity, really looking at the overarching security program. We utilize a framework that we call our operational security performance maturity framework for a lot of our maturity analysis and assessment. Organizational effectiveness is really looking at an organization from the perspective of, okay, well, you've spent a lot of money and you have a lot of tools and toys, but how effective have those tools and toys actually been deployed within the organization? And weighing that against things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, how well should you, in theory, based on the tools in your environment, but also how effective you are with those tools, how well should you be able to detect known attacks that are relevant to your industry? And then business risk. This is all about understanding critical data, critical systems, adversaries that are more likely to target your organization, your industry, and what's the likelihood of these things happening, and if they were to happen, what would be the expected kind of financial ramifications? So that's just kind of from TrustedSec's perspective, the overarching way that we look at security posture as a whole. This is really going to be focusing primarily on program maturity, right? So when we talk about security programs, at a very high level, I've always kind of thought about it from this perspective, that typically young security programs, they grow organically, right? But it's typically, that growth is typically in the wake of the actual business, the growth of the business, right? So it's almost a catch-up kind of scenario where security programs are constantly, especially the young, less mature programs, are really playing catch up as that business grows, and a lot of that growth, does take advantage of, as the business grows, increased budgets and acquiring more sophisticated types of tools, both on the protective and detective side. There's generally a problem with this kind of organic growth, which I kind of refer to as this virtual brick wall, right? So the natural growth of a security program is typically reactive, right? So whether it's project by project, and supporting tactical functions of IT and protecting critical data, or whether or not it's from a compliance perspective. But that kind of reactive organic growth of a program can only go so far. And at a certain point, organizations really need to realize that, hey, security is a cost center. It's a function of the business. And so as a function of the business, understanding that, the protection of our critical data is tied to financial gains and losses. And that really is kind of that almost, how to get over that wall, that virtual brick wall, to better align your security program with all the important things within your business. So we've kind of taken a look at, a general life cycle for security programs, and kind of boiled this down to very simply these three buckets, right? So leadership support, maturity, and centralization. And you can see that, really when we start looking at it from this top perspective, and this is not to say that always programs are, let's say in this example, unfunded, immature, and unorganized, decentralized. It's not necessarily always that way, but these are some nice little categories that are very common, right? And so we start from this unfunded or supported kind of, program. It's very immature and it's decentralized and unorganized. As we kind of move down this set of buckets here, going from reactive more towards the rational, The next kind of general category is, all right, well, the leadership is now funded, but we don't really have ownership, and we have initial maturity. However, we're starting to centralize, even though it may be, for the most part, unorganized. Prioritization is really kind of the next step. We now have ownership, prioritization of critical systems that need to be protected, and that progressive maturity really kind of follows. This is typically then much more of an organized and centralized approach to the general security program. What happens next is really kind of interesting, because as we move towards that rational component, while leadership really does begin to eventually get to that, all of this is definitely needs to be aligned with the business. It's a function of the business. We're continuing our maturity. Many organizations stay with the organized, centralized kind of approach. And that's really, from a journey perspective, there's nothing wrong with this, right? But there are definitely, certain things that we can take advantage of when we talk in terms of, okay, now that we're organized and we have the support and we're working on our continual maturity, are there opportunities to then decentralize and take advantage of specific aspects of this kind of decentralized natural model? So I want to talk a little bit about specific organizational challenges. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be a finite list, but these are definitely some of the big things that I see, and Alex and I see, that can certainly be challenges for any organization, and then also potentially can be addressed by looking at this as the maturity goes up, looking at the decentralization kind of aspect of all of this. So spending increasing, breaches are increasing, static models, right? This is the traditional kind of what's the problem with walls, right? And we'll kind of get into that in a little bit more detail. And then the third one that I want to kind of point out here is organizational entropy. So like I said, this isn't necessarily the end all be all list of organizational challenges as it pertains to information security programs. But I mean, Alex, just from your perspective, what are some of the other what are some additional challenges that you may have seen in your travels?
So I think absolutely there's oftentimes a focus with controls or processes on existence rather than effectiveness, right? So a lot of measurement of whether a control exists without really looking at whether it's doing what it's intended to, if it's buying down the intended risk. When you mention static models or static programs, is the immense change that we've seen over the years, and it seems to be accelerating. And sometimes these programs will remain static, even as external factors change. And the program that may have been very effective a year or two ago is no longer able to meet current challenges. And additionally, a lot of organizational change, whether it's through acquisitions or different focuses of the business, are not necessarily being addressed by the kind of legacy security program. And so it really is that failure to continue to adapt. Another piece is, in the restaurant business, they say that, half of your advertising works, but you don't know which half. And I think that can oftentimes be true as well. It's not knowing which of the aspects of your program are most effective, and knowing how to prioritize these things, and really kind of wrapping, your arms around that whole kind of world.
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree. So just to give a few examples here. So when we talk about increased spending and increased breaches, I mean, the past number of years, as ransomware has gotten, more sophisticated, more common from that kind of financially motivated, adversary, we're spending an awful lot of money today, and that kind of, lots of money being spent on the security programs, but we're also, seeing similar growth just from a ransomware perspective. And a lot of that is really, really impacting, harmfully impactful on organizations that have been successfully hit with ransomware. Additionally, as a result, right, cyber insurance, we're seeing skyrocketing premiums all over the place, 4 to 5 times, renewal rates and things of that nature. And that is, when we look at it from a risk perspective and the organization's choice to kind of transfer risk away from the business itself into, utilizing insurance, this is starting to become a problem just in terms of, hey, is this even worth it? And one of the other things that is also kind of like contributing to, increased spending is, well, information security has a talent shortage today. I believe that, in my opinion, what I've seen, there's certainly more, more available jobs than there are actual people to fill those jobs, and it's very expensive to kind of retain that level of talent.
And Rocky, to the cyber insurance piece, I think it's important also to note it's not just that premiums are rising. You're also seeing, retention is going way up, and so that retained risk is being priced in. And additionally, it's not just the premiums; it's that the veracity of the assessments that insurance companies are performing prior to underwriting a policy has really increased. It started out where it's a pretty basic process, and that's really become a lot more onerous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're even starting to see, at least a little bit in the financial industries, the idea and concept of self-insuring, right? Now, it's not necessarily probably an appropriate solution for all organizations, but we are starting to see some of that as well, just based on these skyrocketing premiums. So static models, right? I mentioned this is the problem with walls. The walls, the firewalls, the levees, the dikes, they are static controls intended to protect against naturally dynamic threats, right? And eventually over time, a dammed, a little reservoir that's been dammed up or something, eventually over time, that water will, be able to get around it at some point. So, the static models really kind of start with, the mentality of less mature organizations, right? Looking for the cheap fix. It's the organizations that haven't really either hit that virtual brick wall that I referenced, or even starting to try to get over it. But, the problem with the cheap fix is that, well, it's a cheap fix, and typically those solutions are more static than not, right? And then predictability through plans, right? Security programs themselves are intended to increase predictability, right? But realistically, how predictable and to what degree can we actually, can these type of reactive programs, to what degree can they really predict dynamic threats? So static models are another big challenge that I feel can really benefit from potentially looking for opportunities for decentralization as well. The last one, organizational entropy, right? So, to one degree, entropy and organizational entropy really can be thought of as, the natural result of thinking you're smarter than your adversaries, right? But at the end of the day, right, business as usual thinking, which is very common with less secure security programs, that's not really getting outside of your comfort zone, right? And getting outside of your comfort zone is a crucial component for adaptive systems. Organizations are not learning and adapting in line with these dynamic and relevant threats, right? Do you even know what the more relevant threats are for your organization? Let alone, how they evolve over time. And adversaries, right? Adversaries have a lot of incentive. Most of those incentives are financially motivated. But there's a ton of incentives to breach an organization. And kind of the result of this organizational entropy is that entropy really ultimately results in reduced innovation. And in almost all organizations, even if it's not super apparent and super, tied to, let's say, whatever that organization produces, innovation across the entirety of an organization is super important, right? So when we look at principles for naturally adaptive systems, and this is where I'm going to cite some sources here, right? This paper, How Biological Systems Use Information to Adapt to in an Unpredictable World, by Raphael Sagarin and his cohort. I forget his first name, but his last name was Taylor. This is really, for me, kind of like the intro to these concepts. And then Sagarin, then, as I mentioned earlier, went and published his book, Learning from the Octopus. So there are several principles here for naturally adaptive systems. The first is that they use information to mitigate uncertainty. Okay, and we're going to dive into these, in more detail. Secondly, learn from your successes, not your failures. And then the third one is, extend your adaptability through symbiotic relationships. So these three primary principles for naturally adaptive systems really then kind of lay the groundwork for semi-autonomous, decentralized kind of systems. So when we kind of look then into each of these three primary principles, starting with information and uncertainty, right? So information systems that are looking at information, gathering information from multiple sensors, quote unquote, or observers, right? A single observer may miss threats, may miss specific threats. Different observers may be better at detecting different threats than others. So on the one hand, these, from this particular principle, it's really, really important to be able to gather and then process the right information and get it from multiple areas. Creating uncertainty for your adversaries, think of things like flocks of birds and schools of fish, and then signaling the presence of a threat, right? Certainly communications are important here, but alerting others to a threat reduces, obviously, the adversary's likelihood of success. When we kind of look at this from an information security parallel, we can see that, well, creating in our worlds, creating a culture of incentivized awareness, now your people are your sensors. And that's really, really valuable. Ensuring that a really strong security awareness program that really helps build a culture of security really enhances the organization's ability to detect, anomalies and things of that nature throughout your actual user base. Creating uncertainty for your adversaries. I mean, honeypots are a great example of that. I mean, there's certainly others, but just, from that perspective of creating uncertainty for somebody that wants to potentially breach your organization, that's definitely one thing that I think, that organizations really could utilize, much more and heavier. And then the last one, signaling the presence of a threat, right? We've gotten pretty good at it, but, just in terms of things like vulnerability alerts and CERT organizations, computer emergency response teams, vendor kind of malware updates and real-time reputation type controls, things of that nature, but being able to kind of signal that there's the presence of a threat. So the next one, learning from your successes. Failures in nature usually don't end well. So that's probably one reason that the naturally adaptive systems tend not to learn from failure, right? They learn from success. Now, everybody here who's in information security understands that perfect security doesn't exist, neither in our industry specifically or even in nature, right? And there's this concept of good enough, right? Many animals utilize kind of like these survival techniques that are good enough to ensure that the species populates and things of that nature. And some examples, right? So predators obviously use camouflage. Some species, like their colors are indicative of being venomous, right? and even other species of those same types of creatures like frogs or spiders can mimic the colors of the venomous versions to lower the likelihood that they may be tracked down by a predator, and even mimicking predators' markings. Certain caterpillars mimic larger creatures' facial traits and things of that nature. But over time, these types of strategies have become good enough for those types of species. Looking at it from information security, right? We're all about learning lessons learned from, especially following incidents, right? Mostly focusing on what went wrong and less on what actually worked throughout, whatever whatever we're actually looking at, right? So there's certainly opportunity in my mind for organizations to really begin looking at it much more from learning from your successes. And then the good enough concept, right? I mentioned the MITRE ATT&CK framework that we utilize from our effectiveness, our effectiveness services. But that's an example. It's a really interesting example of a framework that has documented, let's say, known techniques and groups that have targeted specific industries that you can kind of look at and say, okay, well, given my industry and given the groups that target that industry, what are going to be the more commonly seen attack techniques? It may be good enough to focus in on those, right? But also, in addition to that, understanding motivation as well, adversary motivation. Is this an opportunistic, kind of financially motivated actor? Is this a very targeted, very well-funded nation state attack, things of that nature? But this gives us an idea of how we can kind of look at learning from our successes and finding those good enough tactics. The last one is symbiotic relationships. There's a lot of examples in nature of symbiotic relationships. I won't go into all the details here. But essentially working with others to assist with our deficiencies. RAS fishes set up cleaning stations on reefs for larger fish, which could very well be predatory against them, but they aren't. Aphids and ants, aphids farm aphids to drink their honeydew. Oxpeckers, these are birds on the African plains. They remove parasites from large plains mammals. They also help alert mammals, in the presence of another predator. And badgers and coyotes are actually interesting themselves, sole hunters, working together using their individual kind of traits in terms of the coyote speed versus the badger's ability to dig. They may not every hunt share the same actual successful kill, but the kind of trade-off between the two of them over time is very mutually beneficial. When we look at it from the InfoSec perspective as well, obviously we have tons of third-party kind of third-party organizations that most businesses work with. So obviously that's a pretty straightforward one, but there are certainly other opportunities to look at the symbiotic relationships within your own organization, right? Human resources sharing statistics on employee turnover, and specifically employees that work with sensitive data. That's a very interesting kind of metric to follow. Legal, right? Especially with ransomware. And we've seen this several times, over the past couple of years where successful ransomware, debilitates an organization's, financial function and payroll function to the point that, the unions that the organization utilizes have clauses in their contracts that, if they don't get paid on time, then the organization is going to get penalized, right? These are things that need to be kind of taken advantage of that a lot of times aren't necessarily always in the front of people's minds. And then leadership, right? This is, when I look at things from the business risk perspective, this is one of the most important things. What is our critical stuff, right? What do we have? Where does it live? Tying all of that into inventories, which are also, a big challenge for organizations. And also understanding the business financial loss thresholds, right? To what degree of a financial loss, could you withstand, and things of that nature. So these, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll say, Rocky, I think too, one of the things that we see also is that's talked about a little bit less is cooperation between organizations that maybe are in the same vertical and companies that are used to competing. I know a number of years ago, there was an extremely large breach at a very large organization, and it's not very well known, but what they did is under a lot of secrecy, they brought in InfoSec and other leadership from organizations in the same industry, and were very open about sharing exactly how everything happened and what they'd found and everything else. And a number of those organizations that were part of that discussion went back and made sure they were prepared for and hardened against the exact same things that had happened. And so there are, I think, more rare than we wish, but there certainly are a lot of examples too of organizations that generally compete with each other, helping in this arena.
That's a great point, Alex. So now that we have kind of like these three big concepts or principles of naturally adaptive systems, that then opens the door for looking at things more from the organized and decentralized approach, right? We have foundations of organized decentralizations with these three principles, and ultimately those enable an organization to take advantage of localized knowledge, right? So localized knowledge enables better decision making, because it's closer to the events and incidents. Localized risk management. For example, a manufacturing operations director likely has a better ability, to analyze threats and the risk of their own plant floor than let's say a business manager or even an IT team, right? Localized and more relevant policies. The needs of an R&D group may be very, very different from the needs of the manufacturing facility that makes those products designed by the R&D group. And then the last thing here, we talked a little bit earlier on, the talent retention. This type of localized autonomy, can absolutely lead to higher talent retention, right? For various reasons, but I've certainly seen this in practice, where that the localized autonomy of different people in different areas of the organization that have that kind of authority, quote unquote, to make decisions in the field, can certainly lead to higher talent retention.
And I think, Rocky, too, when it comes to kind of localization, and is one of the things that it still shocks me as often as we see it, is that organizations, a lot of enterprise risk and contractual liability and everything else is being accepted at levels where you would not expect. And I think if executive management were aware of that, they would want to take action. And so I think formalizing that, how those risk decisions are made at lower levels and how that rolls up to the overall risk program is essential. I often talk about one of the things that bothers me or I worry about is when I see kind of IT practicing law, right? Because IT functions do seem to spend a lot of time interpreting regulations and interpreting contracts and other things that really shouldn't be sitting in that location.
Yeah, no, that's a great point as well. So now we've kind of laid the table, right, so to speak, for the potential for organized and decentralized kind of things within a system. But how do we really kind of then take advantage of it, right? How do we practically and effectively take advantage of these principles of natural adaptation and then the kind of associated benefits of decentralization? So the concept here is challenge, competition, cooperation. So we see in nature that organisms have challenges. Let's say it's finding food, so to speak. No, not so to speak. Legitimately finding food. So taking a challenge, having a challenge, and trying to essentially get around that challenge. What that in nature leads to is competition between different organisms or different parts of an organism or higher system. And that's really interesting, because over time, what we then see with that competition of trying to, trying to do something or successfully get around this challenge, is that larger systems take advantage of the smaller kind of competitive nature between, between these different areas. And that leads to general cooperation with the larger system, right? So we can kind of, as an example, I'll kind of walk through something here, which is, if we look at the challenge, competition, cooperation kind of, theory here, as an example, if you have a challenge for different decentralized units within an organization that, the number of successful phishing attacks must be below, let's say, for example, 5%, then that means that you will get a bonus incentive, right? So the competition aspect of this is really interesting. As each of the different decentralized units, they all see each other's metrics and bonuses. And so that then instills a competitive nature within, within these different decentralized units, that then as a result, that incentivized cooperation results in a more aware and secure overall ecosystem. So just in terms of that cooperation, there's really interesting kind of, other examples out there. I mean, just general cooperation with things like the ISEC groups, those industry groups and things of that nature. That's a really, really interesting example as well. Good, and kind of back to that incentivized nature of this, of a lot of these things as well. Good incentivized awareness programs are really, really good examples of kind of that, cooperation, the challenge, competition, cooperation that then ultimately, results in a more secure ecosystem. One of the things that, that can also be done, and this is really now more specifically within our, kind of our area of expertise, right? Information security. We can take advantage of we can utilize known advantages, right? There are opportunities to kind of speed up this evolutionary process, this natural adaptation. For example, centralized firewalls or a centralized firewall policy manager. It certainly makes, the management of firewalls very easy, but, there's the individual decentralized units may, also, if one unit has adopted something like this, and through the challenge, competition, cooperation aspect, they're hitting their metrics, they're getting their bonuses and things of that nature. Other decentralized units may look to them and be like, oh, wow, that's probably a really interesting idea, and take advantage of kind of something that has been known to be successful in other areas of an organization to speed up that evolution of the system. Another good example is centralized communications, right? We talked about being able to alert at the presence of a threat. So centralized communications certainly helps that within decentralized organizations. Now, when we kind of look at it from a much larger organization, and again, this, we'll talk about it on the next slide, just in terms of use cases, but I want to emphasize here that this is not at all restricted to, very large global enterprise organizations. However, very large enterprise organizations do have an interesting kind of, I would say, advantage as well, in that they can realistically look at it from the perspective of local or global and regional, right? So, for example, a large enterprise organization may have a global chief operating officer, information officer, and information security officer. And that's at the global layer where the challenges, strategy, and guidance are really kind of handed out to the regional organizations, right? So then it's up to the regional operating officers and information security officers to compete, resulting in these more secure systems. From a use case perspective, any organization that is looking to acquire additional resources through M&A activity is certainly an opportunity to look at it from this decentralization perspective. If, for example, if the initial acquisition is not going to be a rip and replace acquisition, and they have their own team, this kind of strategy absolutely, absolutely is in the cards as an opportunity, to function more decentralized. The acquisitions allowing them to function more in a decentralized manner. Additionally, multi-function organizations, right? So healthcare and manufacturing are good examples. Each, depending on the organization, and many times each has, let's say, a research and development group, as well as kind of like the primary care from a hospital perspective, or a plant floor, or processing facility, or manufacturing. But those are opportunities, for an organization to, as it becomes, more supported through leadership, and you're approaching the continual maturity aspect of the program, looking at these opportunities for decentralization to take advantage of these natural security, the adaptation strategies. Any industry with multi-campus environments, right? So higher ed, et cetera, or public administration. And then like I just mentioned on the previous slide, those global multi-regional organizations are a great opportunity to kind of look at this type of strategy. Hybrid models may make most sense, may make the most sense for most organizations. So this is not, obviously this is not a black and white issue, right? There may be times when decentralization may have better benefits than centralization. There may be times when centralization has more benefits to the business than decentralization. So as we kind of wrap up here, I just want to review here in closing, right? As your organization's security program matures and becomes better aligned with the business, look for these types of decentralized opportunities, right? There may be a lot, there may not be a lot, but they're likely going to be out there. And as part of this decentralization kind of strategy, it will allow you to take advantage of that local knowledge, the localized relationships and reaction times. And in order to really kind of, take advantage of the decentralization, look at these incentivized challenges that then lead to competition that ultimately result in cooperation in the larger system. And then the last point here, take advantage of previously gained institutional knowledge that can help speed up this quote unquote evolution process, right? The natural, these natural systems and their principles. So with that, Alex, any kind of, parting thoughts from your perspective on this particular topic?
No, Rocky, I think this has all been fascinating. And I think that one of the things that interests me most, just the longer I'm in this industry, is how different organizations are, even in similar verticals. And really how, oftentimes the size of an organization or their revenues, or even their kind of global footprint is not a reliable indicator of how mature their program is likely to be. And I think that's going to continue to hold true, throughout, as we move forward with everything.
Yeah, totally agree. So with that, Stephen, if we want to, we have a little bit of time for some questions if we have any.
Yeah, sure thing. First off, what will be the security budget or percentage of overall IT budget you see in the industry today? So what's a general percentage of security versus IT that you're seeing, which is always a difficult question, but what have you guys been seeing?
Yeah, so it is a tough question. It varies by industry, and in my experience, it varies on the size of an organization, the number of people that it's supporting. So it is a very difficult question to kind of precisely answer. Generically, some organizations that I've seen try to look try to kind of look at that, 2 to 5% of IT, IT is being kind of like that 2 to 5% of the overall organization's budget. And then a fraction of that ends up being, a budget for security. But that also illustrates kind of one of the problems that I have with kind of that nested. To me, that's not quite business aligned, because if your security budget is a fraction of the overall IT budget and they're all part of one budget, that means that security is still just being viewed as a function of technology. And that's not where we want to be. We want to get to that more mature, business aligned security program where leadership understands that security ultimately is a function of business, right? Directly tied to gains and losses. Alex, what about, what have you seen?
No, I would say that's, as you can imagine, in our area of consulting, that's a pretty common question, and it's almost impossible to answer. Part of because you have to define, what security spending is, and not to sound facetious, but is there a difference between security spending versus implementing secure IT, right? In even if you're just focusing on the IT aspects, and thinking back to years ago. IT was thought of as something very separate in the business, and now IT is everywhere. And I think security is kind of moving that way as well. And when you start to even look at line items and employees and who you're hiring and what they're doing, it's very tough, right? If you have 10 developers and one is just a software security person, versus if all your developers are very highly trained in writing secure code and et cetera. You might look at your budget as just that one software security person is providing the security, when really it should be spread across the multiple people. So again, I think to get to that number and to be able to, especially because people always want to do benchmarking, right? Across, with our other organizations, is you really have to define what you mean by security spending, or what we mean by security spending, and then compare from there to make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
Absolutely.
How are companies standardizing if it's a decentralized model?
Great question. Yeah. So standardization isn't necessarily, something that means that you can't be decentralized, right? You can have standards, and standards are actually very, very valuable for the majority of businesses out there. But those standards can be at that more potentially, let's say the technical and tactical layers that help a decentralized model kind of achieve the goals of those challenges, right? So I mentioned kind of like that as an example, the centralized kind of firewall policy manager, right? That's kind of a standard, right? If one area of an organization has adopted that standard and is making their maintenance and management and administration of those devices, much easier, other decentralized units can also adopt that, and that kind of, I mentioned speed up this quote unquote evolutionary process. So it's not necessarily one or the other, right? Standardization can live in both centralized models as well as decentralized models.
Okay, great. Where is a good place to start with metrics? Are there particular ones that make it easier to have early success?
Yeah, this is kind of a passion of mine as well. And what's the standard consulting answer? It depends, right? So certainly it's going to depend on the business itself, and ultimately the people that are going to find specific metrics valuable are going to be the business leaders, right? So that's really where you need to start, is having conversations with and again, this ends up being more along the lines of that kind of like that last phase of the program maturity, right? So there's ownership, there's prioritization, and then the continual maturity. that's when organizations can really then begin to have the conversations between the technical teams and the leadership teams. And remember, they don't usually speak the same language, right? So again, there's another challenge there, but you need to understand what are going to be the valuable metrics that the leadership teams would like to see to help them make their business decisions, as well as what metrics the technical teams will find value in that helps them actually accomplish their challenges. So understanding what the different areas of any individual organization will find valuable in metrics is the first place to start, right? But generically, something like, okay, well, like the example, less than 5% of successful phishing attacks throughout, a decentralized unit's population, then results in, a bonus incentive or something like that. I mean, that's a good example there, but the understanding of what the business is going to find valuable is the step one right there. Absolutely.
And then kind of piggybacking, how are you defining that as successful? Like why would 5% be different than 7%? And also, what is an example of a success that you would learn from? Sometimes they can be misleading, like the number of viruses blocked or what have you.
Sure. So the first question there, just in terms of, I'm sorry, I just lost. What was the first part of that?
How did you decide if it's 5% is a
right,
success
of that metric?
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Right.
That's going to, again, kind of, as the journey kind of moves towards, if there's an opportunity and as the journey moves towards maybe a decentralized model like that, that's going to be something that, again, those conversations need to happen with the business, right? And so it may end up being that, less than 1% is actually that organization's, kind of like metric for that particular thing that we're looking at to gauge as a challenge. And other organizations, that might be 7%, right? It just, it's going to depend on a number of different variables. And again, I'm kind of going back to that standard consulting answer, which is it depends. And then the second part of that, Steve, I'm sorry,
was what is an example of a success? Yeah, what's an example of a success that you could learn from? And sometimes some of those metrics can be misleading.
Yeah. What's some good success examples? As you're looking at the problem, I think historically has always been, right, security. We all kind of forget that security is there if we're doing it right. And so being able to communicate anything in relation to, hey, yes, we've invested in these types of things, and these things are helping us detect, let's say, for example, anomalous logins from various locations from a single particular account credential, right? That could potentially be an indicator of something, more bad. But those types of kind of things that then are feeding into our decision model, those are successes, right? So there's, in my opinion, there's tons and tons of things that we can kind of look at from that perspective, that then we can build upon and learn more from.
All right. Can you talk about what's good enough as it relates to MITRE ATT&CK?
Sure. Oh yeah. So it's not just MITRE ATT&CK, but specifically with MITRE, the attack framework has specific, if you look at the wiki page, there's a whole section on known adversarial groups, threat groups. And, you have to kind of take some of this with a grain of salt, because, that type of telemetry gets stale really, really quickly, right? But, what's good enough, in my opinion, is looking at those groups and understanding what they're actually targeting. Are they targeting your industry? Are they targeting some other industry primarily? What are their motivating factors? Are they financially motivated? We can begin to kind of whittle down and say, okay, well, that particular threat group does target my industry, and that particular threat group has been known to utilize these specific attack techniques in the past. So if we then can focus, and again, this isn't a silver bullet, there's no perfect security, but if we focus in on the more commonly seen attack techniques and being able to defend against those more commonly seen attack techniques by the groups that actually are targeting our industry, that could be good enough, right? Another example is, well, the MITRE framework has, multiple, I think it's 14 tactic groups today. The first two is like, reconnaissance and whatnot. So that stuff's, that stuff we can't really detect and defend against for the most part. So if we look at the 12 other tactics that are in there, like lateral movement or defense evasion, you may be really, really good at, let's say, detecting initial access, or you may be really, really good at preventing lateral movement. That might be good enough, right? Because attacks come in chains, right? So initial access leads to, access, and then credential, some type of privilege escalation, is a credential attack, and then credential attacks, can lead to lateral movement, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're really good at that, let's say one of those, and you disrupt that chain, that's good enough. Or that can likely be good enough, right? We don't want to speak in too much, statically. But so yeah, those are some examples related to the MITRE attack that are in my mind are good enough.
Last one here, one or two more. Can you go from unorganized and decentralized to organized and decentralized, or do you have to centralize first?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I certainly have never seen it. I think that, the unorganized, decentralized, you have to organize first, right? And at some point that organization is, in my mind, naturally going to lead to centralization, right? So, here's all the firewalls that we're going to be using across the entire organization. That's almost a natural kind of result of centralization, organizing and centralizing. So I don't think personally that it can be done. I don't think you can just make the jump unless you spin up a brand new business, and that brand new business already understands that security is a function of the business, and here's the full support, and we already know what our opportunities are for decentralization. I suppose it's possible, but I think it'd be highly unlikely.
Okay, great. Well, that brings us to our time today. One last question was pretty much the deck that is used for the presentation we shared with the participants. Definitely, if you reach out to us, we'll be able to send it to you directly, no problem. And with that, I wanted to thank everybody for joining today, and especially thank Rockie and Alex for your discussion today. It was a really informative and a very unique way to look at this problem and how some of the better organizations are doing it. So with that, thank you everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.